thanks for coming. Tonight's shir was dedicated by Gilad and Chani Yocheved Shimshon, and this is in honor or for the sake of the dissemination of Chassidus and for a bracha for children. May Hashem grant them a big blessing in honor of the greatest of merits, the dissemination of Torah, and particularly the dissemination of the inner light of the Torah that is the absolute last necessity for the coming of Mashiach. So this should bring the greatest of blessings to them with healthy children, Bekarev Mamish, very, very quickly. Another dedication tonight was on the shir. This was by the family of Reuven Yehuda ben Avram Olav Hashalom, whose yahrzeit is tonight, the 19th of Sivan. He had a very big heart to help people and loved, and a great love for Torah learning. May his neshama be elevated as a result of a place that of the teaching of the Torah studied here tonight, in our center dedicated to reaching out to all Yidden with love and definitely making the Torah delightful and loved by many, many people. So may this be a very big schus for his neshama, and to soar higher and higher to the greatest of heights. Channel lots of blessings to his family in everything, in the material and in the spiritual. The shir and the CD this week was also dedicated by Rabbi Lazar Frankel, and this is in honor of two yahrzeits that he has this week. One of them is grandfather's yahrzeit, which is tonight, the 19th of Sivan, Reb Chanoich Henach ben Reb Meshulam Zalman, and also his father's yahrzeit, which is going to be on Thursday, on Chaf Aleph Sivan, Meshulam Zalman ben Reb Chanoich Henach. May the neshama of his grandfather and father both soar higher and higher and higher and higher, and channel lots of blessings to him, to his entire family, and everything in the spiritual and the physical, and all the good that a person can want and need. And may it all be B'harchava Gedola with a great abundance. The last dedication tonight was on the CD. This was by Rivka Chaya Rossi, and this was in honor for Mazel and much, much bracha. May Hashem give you lots of Mazel and a lot of bracha, with great, great abundance in everything. Should all materialize very, very quickly. This week is Parshas Shelach. We read, the Torah portion that we're reading is the story of the spies. A difficult story to understand, a tragic story. The Jewish people are ready, they're poised to enter into the Holy Land after they've already experienced the giving of the Torah, they've experienced the Exodus, and this was the dream. This was the great dream, the entering into the promised land. And right before they go in, there is a desire to send scouts, to send spies, to go scout out the land. The spies go and they come back, and they have a negative report. And with, I guess, the dramatic effects of their relating what they saw in describing the nations that lived in the land of Canaan, that they were very mighty people living in fortified cities, strong, they were giants, and basically they said that the land is inconquerable. It's impossible to wage war against them, and they scared the people. They said, we are going to enter into the land, and it's going to be a horrific massacre. Our wives, our children are going to, Rahman al-Islam, be butchered. It's going to be horrific. And therefore, we cannot go. Astonishing, the Jewish people that were so excited to enter into the land suddenly got cold feet, and a pandemonium breaks out in the camp. Everybody starts weeping and crying. They don't want to go. They give all kinds of suggestions, of ideas. Some of them suggest, let us make a leader and let us go back to Egypt. They rebel against their beloved teacher. They're doubting God. The whole thing is a horrible mess. God gets angry at the Jewish people. First, he wants to wipe them out completely. But in the end, because as a result of Moshe's pleading, God agrees to keep them alive and not to kill them instantly, but that the entire generation would perish in the wilderness. The entry into the land is delayed for 40 years, and only 40 years later, the next generation are the ones that enter into the land. That is the story. This thing is very, very surprising. The whole story makes no sense. I mean, to believe that a nation that has seen what this nation has seen. There has never been a people in the world that has witnessed God firsthand. They weren't told by anybody. This wasn't related to them, even by people as trusted as parents or grandparents. This is something where Einu Rov Eloizar, their eyes saw. It wasn't through anybody else. It wasn't even watching eyewitness news on television or the like. This was with their own eyes. They saw it happening. They saw the Exodus. They saw the miracles. And it wasn't very long before this. This was less than 2 years. 2 years, less than 2 years from when they left Egypt. About a year and a half. So it's 15 months. Before that, they had left Mitzrayim. For an entire year before they went out of Mitzrayim, they saw the most spectacular miracles. They saw God turning the world over topsy-turvy. The whole world went upside down. Hashem changed, suspended every rule, every law of nature. Brought the mightiest empire, the Egyptians, down on their knees. And they were led out of Mitzrayim. And then when the Egyptians pursued them by the Yam Suf, by the sea, they had nowhere to run. God performed the greatest miracle of splitting the sea before them and obliterated the mightiest empire, the strongest, the superpower of the world in a blink of an eye. Gone! Not a trace left. As the pasuk says, "Le'nishabem af echad." And these were the people who sang the song, proclaiming God's greatness, seeing the miracles firsthand. They traveled in the desert. Their traveling in the desert was one perpetual miracle. They were surrounded. They were being carried by a limousine service. The clouds were carrying them through the desert. The clouds were lowering them. It was flattening the mountains were flattened. The canyons were raised up so that they're going on flat land all the time, and they knew this. Water was coming out of rocks. Their clothing was self-laundered for 2 years. No one had to wash their clothing. Everything was fresh all the time. Sandwiches came falling down from the sky every morning. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is insane. They see God literally with their eyes. For close to 2 years, they're watching. Spectacular miracle after miracle happening in front of their eyes. What did the Meraglim tell them? One of the things the spies said was that the nations in Canaan are too strong. They're too strong for us. The sages, however, say that the word mimenu is hinting to something. It's not saying it's too strong for us, but rather it's saying it's too strong for God. That God cannot uproot the inhabitants of the land. In the words of the sages, even the owner of the house, the owner of the house can't move his furniture out. God put his furniture in there. He settled these giants in that land, and now God cannot evict them. He just doesn't have the power to do so. How can it be that these people made that proclamation? And how can it be that the people believed it, bought into it, when they saw Hashem's might and Hashem's power, that Hashem is omnipotent and He can do whatever He wants? Very strange. Then we got to question something else. However, we're going to understand how the Jews doubted God and that they questioned their belief and their emunah in Hashem. We need to understand, on the other hand, the restoration, the return of their faith. Because what happened after this? What happens after this God is upset, wants to kill them all. Moshe pleads on our behalf, rescues us once again after he rescued us just a couple of months earlier by the sin of the golden calf. So we owe our lives, our existence to Moshe. God tells Moshe to tell the Jewish people about the punishment. And Moshe lays it heavy upon them, telling them exactly what was going to happen. They're going to die. Their carcasses are going to fall in the desert. And only the next generation is going to go into the land. And suddenly what happens after that? The Jewish people say, we want to go. They regret. They have a change of heart. They want to go. And then some people wanted to go immediately. Moshe Rabbeinu has to persuade them not to, but they don't listen. They go anyways and they get killed. They didn't listen. The rest of the people continue journeying in the desert. For some odd reason, they didn't continue with their plans, let us return to Egypt, which was one of their plans that they decided to do. So suddenly they become like docile sheep. They follow behind God like a flock for 40 years in the desert. Everybody's okay, everybody's fine. And then 40 years later, they go into Eretz Yisroel following Joshua without any hesitation, without any fear. And what's really astonishing is when they go in 40 years later, they're accompanied by miracles, but not the same level of miracles that they had when they went out of Egypt. And not the same level of miracles that they were promised they would enter the land in had they gone in with Moshe at that time. This time they had to use weapons. They had to fight a war. It was only that God assisted them by sending an angel with them, and God assisted them in the wars. Had they not sinned, they would have gone in, and none of them, there wouldn't have been a one bullet fired. The whole thing would have been miraculous. And yet the Jewish people have no problem. They're going to fight against these very same giants that terrified them, that they were so scared. And you wonder what happened. How did these people that are heretics, how are the people that are such skeptics, suddenly they're okay, they're all fine, let's go. And they're all following. So you would think that something, Moshe must have proven to them God's might. They must have seen some incredible signs of Hashem's power that yes, indeed, God can overpower these mighty giants. But we don't see any of that. Read the pasuk. What happens? First, God is angry and is a conversation with Moshe. The Jews don't even hear about it. Hashem tells Moshe in a prophecy that he wants to wipe them out. Moshe pleads on their behalf. Doesn't say anywhere that they're told about this. Then, after Hashem agrees to Moshe, it says, Amor Alei, this is in Perek Yud Dalet Pasuk Chavches. And God says to Moshe, Amor Aleim, say to them, Chai Oni, I swear. Ne'um Hashem, I swear by my name, God says. Im Loi Kasher Dibartem Ba'oznei. If not like you said in my ears, that which you complained, Kena Asalachem, so I will do to you. Bamidbar Azeh, in this desert, Yipru B'Gleichem, your corpses will fall. V'chol Pikudechem, and all of your numbers. L'chol Nisparchem, everybody that has been counted. Miben Esrim Shana V'Mayla, from everybody of 20 years and over, Asher Yiloisen Aloi, all those who fought against me, who complained, all of those will die in the desert. I swear, if you will come to the land, that I have sworn earlier that I will bring you, I swore to Avram, Yitzchak, and Lashak and Eschamba to make you dwell there. It's not going to be you. I'm going to fulfill that oath through your children. The only ones that are coming in, the only exceptions, are two people. Those that were loyal to me, Kalev and Yeshua. The Tapchem and your little children, that you said would be the plunder, those very children that you were so worried about, they will come into the land. And they will enter the Yadu, and they will know as they will get to know that land that you have rejected. And your corpses will fall in this desert. And your children will graze, or rather will wander in the desert for 40 years. V'nasu as in useichem, and they will bear your guilt. Atoim pigrechem b'midbar, until the last of your corpses has fallen in the desert. Very frightening words. Hashem is speaking harsh words. How long will this take? As many of the days that you that you explored the land, as long as this expedition it took 40 days, well, that's how long you're going to be in the desert. A year for a day. Every day is gonna translate into a year. Abarim Yoim Lashana. You explored for 40 days. It's going to become a day for a year. Yoim Lashana. Tisuas of Nesechem. You will carry your sin. Arbaim Shana for 40 years. V'yadaitem es tenuasi. And you will know what it means to be estranged from me. And then one more pasuk, Hashem says, Ani Hashem dibarti, I God have spoken. If not for this, I will do to this bad assembly, Hanayadim alai that have ganged up against me. Bamidbar hazeh yetamu, in this desert they will be finished. V'sham yomusu, and that's where they will die. But then the pasuk says something that happened. Vayomusu anashim, that the people who spoke, the meraglim, the spies, who spoke against Moshe, died a sudden death, and Yeshua ben Nun and Kaleb ben Yefuna survived. Then it says, "Vayedaber Moshe sadvarim me'elam." Moshe spoke these words, El Kol b'nei Yisroel. Moshe got up and gave a speech, and he spoke these words that God told him to say, and he conveyed the wrath of God, as God told him to say it to the Jewish people. Vayisablu ha'am ma'od. The people were very sad. They were heartbroken. Vayashkimu baboker, and in the morning, after they were heartbroken, vayalu arosha or lamar. Suddenly they have a change of heart. They wake up in the morning, and all of them say, "We are onward. We're going to Eretz Yisroel. Hinenu, we're here. V'alinu elamakam, let us go up to the land. Asher Amar Hashem, that Hashem says, Ki chatanu, we have sinned." So the question is, if these people had doubts, if they were really afraid, and if they really believed, which it seemed like that they believed it so strongly, what they said the day before, Tisha B'Av, the day before, they were all crying and saying, it's impossible, we're going to die. In the day, God cannot do this. Suddenly, the next day, they're all going. What happened? It doesn't say that there was anything that happened over here that should have given them and convinced them otherwise of the fear that they had the day before. You see, by the story of Korach, next week's Torah portion, in which we're going to read about the rebellion of Korach against the priestlyhood, against Moshe and Aaron. So over there also we find that the Jews later side with Moshe. But over there, Moshe has to do a sign to convince the Jewish people to win over their confidence, their faith in him. Moshe stands in front of the Jewish people and makes a declaration. He says, if Korach is right, then either he will survive or he will die a natural death. But if I'm right and he's wrong, then a crazy thing is going to happen now in the desert. And the earth is going to open up and they're going to be swallowed alive. After that happened, then you see the Jews come around. Okay, so you had a sign. Something to show that Moshe was right. And even then, it's not so easy. It doesn't go so smoothly. If you read the Psukim, it's back and forth, then they complain to Moshe, you killed the people. It takes a while until they settle everything. But by this story, you don't have any sign, no display of God's power. It doesn't even say that Moshe Rabbeinu sat down and said, okay, everybody, let's sit down and review things over again. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. You know, God created the heaven, he created the earth, he created the giants, he made all of this from absolute nothing. We don't see Moshe doing any of such lecturing, any discussion about it. Moshe doesn't even give them a whole story, don't be afraid, because don't you see what God did to Mitzrayim, and don't you see the supernatural powers that Hashem has, that he can override nature as he has seen, and in 1 second he can strike all the giants dead, he can shrink them in a second if he wants, he can do whatever he wants. Moshe doesn't say anything. All he does is he yells at them that they will die, and suddenly they're all like, oh yeah, we're going. Why are they going? If they don't believe in God's power, how are they going? So he told them, you're going to wander in the desert, you're going to die in the desert. Okay, so they don't like that. But what's the option? If they go there, they're going to be slaughtered. That's what they said. That's what they believed in. So what is the change? So we don't understand two things. How did they lose their faith? And then how did they gain back their faith? What is happening over here in this story? So to understand this, we need to get a little bit of a better understanding in the general idea of faith. What is faith? Emunah. And why, or what is the possibility, or how does it work that sometimes a human being experiences doubts in his faith? And what is the nature of sfekos and emunah, doubts in faith? What is it really all about, and how to deal with them? We have an incredible lesson of how Moshe Rabbeinu deals with doubts and faith over here in this lesson, in this Torah portion. Where is emunah? We say the Jewish people are characterized by God. God tells us to Moshe Rabbeinu in this first meeting with him, when Moshe said they won't believe in me, God punishes Moshe severely. Moshe got saras, because God says you're a choshed b'ksherim, you suspect innocent people. You're suspecting my children, they're not believers? The Jewish people are children, the believers, the children of believers. They're maminim b'nei maminim. And what God is really saying is something very, very, very powerful about the nature of the Jewish people. God is saying that it is intrinsic to us. It is inherent to us. We are believers, the children of believers. Why emphasize we're the children of believers? It means that our faith is inherent, and it's something that we have from birth. It's something embedded in our genetics. In our very, very, very essence of who we are, we have emunah. That's why even a little baby who's just born has faith, has emunah in God. Which tells us the first thing about emunah, that emunah is not something that comes from, it's not logic. Because logic is not developed in a little baby, a 1-year-old. If we're saying that we're 1 day old, mamina b'nei mamina means our emunah is inborn. It's part of our very essentials, and logic is not developed at that time. Logic takes a time for a person to be able to work things out in their mind. Our faith in God might be sometimes enhanced by logic, and when we believe in God, it might be mixed with logic, but that's not what emunah is. Emunah is a spiritual power in our soul. Our soul is part of our inner mechanism. It's part of our neshama. Our soul has faith. It has emunah. It has belief in God. What is that emunah? What is it? How can we define the emunah? The emunah is something like a powerful conviction, an absolute certainty in the existence of God. And that is embedded in our souls. We just know because we know. Not because of any rational, not because of any logic. It's not stemming from the mind. It's beyond the mind. It's a much deeper conviction than anything our minds can convince us of. So our emunah is a soul feature. It has to do with Nishmas Yisroel, with the special Jewish soul that has this very deep-rooted essential faith. And therefore, there is no such a thing, it's impossible, as a Jewish non-believer. Jews all believe, every single Jew. A Jewish atheist is a contradiction. It cannot be. There's no such a thing. And when people say, at this point in my life, I started lahamin, I started believing, what they're really saying is they found their faith. They discovered their faith that they have already, because we all have an natural intrinsic faith in us from birth. To deny it is like denying our own existence, as if a person says, I don't exist. The very I, the very essence, the very being of a person is saturated with emunah. Because emunah is not even coming from us. Emunah is in the feminine, emunah, which means it's something that we are receiving, something that we are mekabel. We are mekabel the emunah. We are receiving the emunah. Where are we receiving the emunah? Emunah is like a sixth sense in the soul. The soul is sensing God because God is shining into the neshama. Because Hashem shines His light his presence, his being into the soul. That is why the soul knows and is convinced in the existence of God, of Hashem. You see, the truth is like this. The essence of Amun is really not necessary. Amun is not necessary for the fact that God created the world. That's not our emunah, that the world did not come into existence on its own, but that the world was created by a creator, is something that doesn't necessitate emunah. That is something that is coming, that we could reach and conclude from just simple logic, from just simple being, just an honest, decent human being who doesn't want to sit and lie to his or herself all their life. You have to conclude that there is a creator, or else I know it's just plain, simple, ludicrous to make any kind of other argument, because everybody would be ashamed. A person would be ashamed. No one would even, people would laugh. It would be completely crazy for anybody to suggest that if you found a magnificent palace built on top of a mountain, somewhere, I don't know where, somewhere in the middle of the Himalayas, a gorgeous palace with corridors and the rooms have carpeting and incredible decor on the walls, and there is a dining room and a kitchen and sinks and drawers, and here there's forks and there's knives and there's napkins, and there is everything, supplies you need for a kitchen, and here there are bathrooms and toilets and flushing toilets with plumbing, with electricity, and all of this is there. Would anybody in their right mind suggest that this is just a random freak accident happened over billions of years of just erosion, forces of nature pushing things this way and that way? The toilet came about. What are you, ridiculous? Anybody would say that? It's laughable. It's laughable. It's nuts. But people get away with saying that all the time about the world that is a gazillion times more complex than one palace with plumbing and electricity, and it doesn't, the human being, the complexity of the human being, of the human brain, of the eyes, and how the whole body interacts. You know how many billions of things have to work in perfect symmetry and perfect organization, and all this should just happen by random accidents? Any self-respecting human being who doesn't want to live, who can look in the mirror, how can someone argue that? We couldn't prove that there is an existence of a God, but you cannot say this. There is no designer to this. It doesn't make any, so logic points that there is a creator. We also know the Mishnah tells us, Mipsari echze Elokai, from my flesh I see God. Not the Mishnah, there's a pasuk that says, Mipsari echze Elokai, from my flesh I see God, which means aside from the fact of the complexity of the universe itself, but also the fact that the world is alive. See, when we look at our own bodies, we see that our body is alive, and we understand that there is more than the physical that's making it alive. And then everybody has some sense that there is some metaphysical force over there, which we call the soul. And the soul is there, people, whatever you want to call it, but there's some kind of a spirit that's beyond physical machinery that make up the human being. And that's what gives me the love, the passion, the fear, the joy, the anger, the rage, the light, the pleasure. It's not just physical sensations. There is a soul, and there's a soul that's enlivening the body. Now the world is one huge body, enlivened with some mystical power that we can't see, but somebody, something that is putting the power of vegetation, giving life into the trees, making animals move around, moving the galaxies. Everything is alive. What is the life in the world? God is the soul of the creation. So to know Hashem, one doesn't need faith. That is logical. Not only is it logical, it's visual. Unless it's something we can see with our eyes. Unless the only way it's possible to deny that is if a person is so doesn't want to believe that there is a God, that there is a creator. Because if there's a God and there is a creator means that I have certain responsibilities and I'm accountable for the life that I live, and I want to know that I can do whatever I wish and live my life just to indulge my own selfish desires, then I'll blind myself to that which is obvious, and I'll proclaim that there's no God, and therefore everything is an accident, so I can be a total animal in my life, and do whatever I wish, whatever I think, whatever makes me feel good. But from normal thinking, one will come to a conclusion that there is a creator, and someone that made the world. What is the uniqueness of our faith? Our faith is something deeper than that. Our faith is that our knowledge of God is not that God exists, but that the faith of the Jew is that there is no other power in existence aside for God. And even deeper than that, we have emunah, we have a sense, a conviction in our soul that God is the only and absolute reality, the only being that really, really exists. And all of creation is completely non-existent, completely nullified to the point where it's like it doesn't exist. And God is the only existence. That's our faith, because that's what our neshama knows. How does our neshama know that? Our neshama knows that by seeing it. Seeing it. The neshama sees. What does the neshama see? The neshama can see how all of existence is being, even though physically we can't see it. But our souls, because our soul is from heaven, so our soul gets to see how creation is being generated every second from absolute nothingness. That there is this superior power that is blowing creation into existence every second. And that everything is emanating from this one singular source. And that every second is being regenerated. And it requires that force to create it and recreate it all the time from absolute nothingness. In Pirkei Avos it says, Ezahu chacham, who is a wise man? Haroa es hanoled, the one that sees that which is forthcoming. Simply the Mishnah means someone who can see 3 steps down the road, someone who can see the consequences of their actions that they're doing today, what is going to be tomorrow, what is going to be next week, what is going to be next year from that which I'm doing. That's the simple meaning of a wise person, someone who doesn't just look for the instant consequence, but can calculate what is going to be in the future. But the deeper Chassidic interpretation of that, which Shneur Zalman of Liadi says, Ezu Chacham Aroyas Anoiled means wise man is someone who can see with his own eyes how the physical world is being produced every second from God's omnipotent power, that he's speaking the world into existence, Yesh Maayon, something from nothing. There is nothing here, and the worlds are emerging into existence. And the creative life force that's creating the world is everywhere all the time. And the worlds are emanating from God like rays of light emanating from the sun. Continuously. And those rays, hear this, like we once spoke about this on Hanukkah, those rays have never left their source. They're still in their source. Because God is everywhere. So the creations that are just rays emanating from him are within the sun globe itself, and therefore, just like rays of the sun while they're in the sun are non-existent, you can't see the rays because all you see is the sun. The soul sees with its own eyes. It can literally see how all of existence is in its source, is created by God every second, and therefore there's nothing but Hashem. Ein od milvado, and the neshama sees it. Now, seeing, we know, is the strongest way of knowing something. See, logic is powerful. Logic is strong. When we know something with our minds, it's convincing. But it's not so deep. It's not so convincing. If I was to say, if we were to talk about right now how everything that is happening, everybody, how your shirt, your pants is made up of energy, and there's neutrons and electrons spinning around very quickly in your body, on the table, in the chair. Everything around us is just pure energy. I say, well, I don't know. So we have tendencies to have ani mamen b'emunah shalema on this that a scientist says. Okay. But if a scientist comes in and proves it, and does all the proof that would be to prove that it is that way, we accept it. We see it. You know, it's proven by logic that this is the way it is. That matter is really energy. But as much as you're convinced of that, without any doubt, you are more convinced that you have a shirt, and that you're wearing pants, and that you have a table in front of you, and a chair, Because that you see. That I don't have to prove it exists. It proves itself to me. It doesn't exist because my mind calculated so and so, therefore it is. But rather because it is, that's why I know. I see it with my own eyes. When we see something, there's nothing more convincing than that. And even take it that a step deeper, even when we see something contradicts logic, we still believe what we see and not what makes sense. Because if you see something with your own eyes, for instance, I'll give an example. Imagine if you built a big vault, a room, and that room is made out of steel, and you're the one who made it. And you made a big, large, you make a little hole so air comes in, and you made this big 2 feet steel door that clanks shut. You made one key, and no one else can ever make this key. You made the key and you hold it with you in your pocket. You have the key. You walk inside, you check before. It's a very simple room. There's no closets, there's no crevices, there's no holes. It's closed completely. You clank it shut, locked. You're in the inside. Over here, no one can bother you. No one can bother you. I have my privacy now. To reach me, there's no cell phone service over here. It's locked off completely. I'm Machaya. Right? And suddenly, your wife shows up. She's in the room. Say, Gewalt, how'd you get over here? I'm here. How'd you get in? I locked the door. I'm the only one with the key. I'm here. So what would you do? So you're thinking you're hallucinating. You know you're hallucinating. Because it's impossible. By the rules of logic, by scientific, it's impossible. She cannot be in this room. It cannot be. So you're thinking, oh, my mind is playing tricks on me. So maybe seeing might not be enough. You might want to walk over and touch her, but if you touched her and you see her and you hear her, you know she's there. Even though there's a contradiction, it cannot be based on all scientific evidence. She is not in the room, but you know she's there because she's there. You see her. Because what you see, you see. That's it. It's just the way it is. Our soul doesn't need proof that God exists. Our soul sees God. And our soul sees how all of creation emanates from nothingness into something all the time. And that's really where our emunah is. Our emunah is the conviction, absolute conviction, stemming from our soul seeing Hashem and seeing the nullification of all the worlds to God's infinite light and infinite power. Take that even a step deeper. There's even a deeper way of knowing something, even deeper than through seeing something. Because what is the deepest, what is the most convincing thing that we know of, more than anything else in the world? The most convincing thing that we know of is ourselves. We know that we exist. And that we don't need any senses for. See, God gave us 5 senses in which we can sense the outside world that is not us. How do I become aware of something that's not me? Either I can use my logic and deduce that it exists, even though I can't see it in any way. Or I can see it, I can touch it, I can hear it, I can taste it, right? What did I miss out? And smell it. So those are the 5 things in which we become aware of. God forbid, if a person cannot see, if a person cannot hear, if a person cannot smell, they cannot touch, and they cannot taste. Nothing is working, God forbid. So they would absolutely not, they wouldn't have an awareness of anything. Nobody and nothing. Nothing exists to them because they don't have any way of sensing and knowing the outside world except for one thing, except for themselves. Because when you wake up in the morning and you want to know that you exist, you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror or tap yourself or talk and sing something so you can hear yourself or smell yourself. Say, that smells like me. I don't need that to prove that because I know I am, because intrinsically everybody knows that I am because I am. And here's what the mystics tell us. Emunah, faith, that's how deeply you know God is. Because the neshama is a piece of God from above. So the soul knows God not even through seeing. The soul knows God with an intrinsic, essential knowledge of the knowledge of self. It knows the true self, the true source of sources that is the source of everything. That's how deep and how powerful and how unshakable Emunah is. Then the question is, how come our Emunah sometimes is clouded? How come our Emunah sometimes is weakened? And how can it be that sometimes a person says, I don't believe? If it is so essential, if it's so core, elementary in the soul, it's so basic, so how can there be a question in Emunah? And the answer is, for that, God played a trick on us, and he created what is called the Klipa and the Sitra Achra. And the Klipa and the Sitra Achra is the forces of the other side. And they have a mysterious power to cloud our minds and to create illusions and to deny the obvious. See, God created that because God wanted this world to be a challenge. And if it would be obvious to us all the time that we are created from absolute nothing, and that our creation is purposeful, and that every moment our existence is coming from Hashem with a purpose, so we would be dead bent on that purpose all the time, without any distraction, even for a moment. That we have challenges in our lives is because we don't feel that way. We don't sense ourselves that way. We're not living in that deep emunah consciousness that we spoke about before. That's the truth of our neshama. That's not the truth of our consciousness when our neshama enters our body. And the reason for that is when the neshama enters the body, it is wrapped with a wrapper of darkness. It's wrapped with a wrapper of what's called the klipa, the shells. And it's wrapped in the body, the physical world, and the spirit called the ego, the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, that encloaks our neshama, are all agents and entities that come and created through, not created by, but created through the Sitra Achra. They derive their energies through the other side. And what is the other side? Other side is this very impassible kind of creation of spirit, of existence, that exists, and its entire existence is to deny and cover up God. That's what it's all about. That's what it's here. It's here to cloud, to cover, to conceal, and to block. And to make us not see that Hashem is the obvious isyism and beingness of everything. And that's what the klipa does. Now here's the thing about the klipa. Again, it's powers. These are spiritual forces whose job is they were created and elected by God to create a blockage, to create a concealment, to blur, to distort reality. That's what they're all about. That's their job. The interesting thing about it is two things. First of all, the klipa itself that is created by God when they're in a spiritual state know that God created them. See, they have amunah, they have faith. They know and they see that God created them. But yet, they were created to be agents of darkness. Number one. Number two, within the klipas themselves, the very, very, very first elementary klipas, the first agents were created, they are servants of God. They do their job just because they want God to be happy. But as the klipos evolve, the lower klipos, even though they know God, they still enjoy the fact that they rebel against God. They are enjoying their place where they are in creation, that they're denying God's truth, and they get a thrill of the work, and they identify with that rebellion. They become rebellious. They become forces of darkness in this world. Now, what are they in truth? In truth, they have no substance. Klipa has no, because there's no substance to anything that's not God, anything that's denying God. There's no substance to it. Their entire existence is absence of light. They are created to be a blockage, to be a block on light, and they exist from, they don't have any true substance. Their existence is coming from God giving them existence, being in them, yet pulling out of them. So it's an interesting thing. Hashem gives them life. He inserts himself, his power, his energy into them, yet the only way they exist is that very energy that enters in them sort of gets drawn out of them as if it's not there. So they exist only because God is hidden. Therefore, their existence is coming from the non-revelation of God. Therefore, they are really, really very weak. And in truth, there's no power to Klippa at all to ever fight with holiness. It's not like God created us, like the Christians believe in that God created it, that there's a Satan, and Satan has power. Klippa and Sitra Achra have no power at all. Because here's the thing, just like darkness has no existence, only in the absence of light, and the moment you bring in the light, the darkness disappears without a struggle. Imagine the shadow. Person has a shadow. What's the shadow made out of? Is there any substance to the shadow? The shadow is made out of the light not reaching that part. The light is reaching all around. That part is not reaching, so you have the shadow. So the very definition of the shadow, its existence, is only because light is not there. The moment light comes to that place, the shadow disappears instantly. It's not there. Or if the sun comes right on top of your head, so the light is spilling in all directions, so that it's gone without a struggle. There's no fight. It cannot fight. Because its entire existence is only when truth isn't shining. So when Klippa and Kedusha get into a wrestling ring, the moment Kedusha walks in, there's no one to wrestle with. The moment there is a presentation and a revelation of God, a display of God, poof, Klippa is gone. It cannot be. It can only be where there is no presence of God. And where there is no presence of God, there really can't be existence. It's very hard to understand this. Yet, they exist a fake existence, a non-real existence. It's almost like an imaginary existence. It is an imaginary existence. It's just a fluff. It's a fluff of existence denying the basic, the underlying reality of everything, which is Hashem. And here they're somehow, magically, with God's omnipotent power, can make them be in denial of Him. And that's how they exist. Right? What was the purpose for that? To test us, to challenge us. And that's why when there's a spirit of Klippa descending into the body, which is what we call the ego, which comes into the person, there is a conflict in a human life. Here you have a soul that is an entity of light, filled with emunah, filled with truth, deeply aware of God, and it sits and it resides together with someone who is a God, who is a denier of Hashem, who's someone who is at least not aware of God, who's not interested in serving God, who sees life and the world as an independent, autonomous existence, creates a false illusion in the human being that we exist with just because, independent on a higher force, and therefore if I don't have someone creating me and making me, then life is my life, and I will do with my life what pleases me, what makes me feel good. Right? So that's the Klippa blocking on our neshama. But the question we had earlier, if we said earlier that Klippa, its entire existence, is only where there is no light, and that's why in the supernal realms, we know that in the higher worlds there is no Klippa, there is no shells. They exist under all the worlds. They exist at the bottom. Meaning, when the light goes dim, and there is no light, then these agents of darkness, so to speak, enter into existence. And where there is light, there is no Klippa. The question is, but how does it work within a human being? A human being has the most powerful light inside of him, even more powerful than an angel. The human being has a soul. The soul is a little spark from God. So now, how does the Klippa cloud our mind? How then can the Klippa challenge and fight the soul? Because we know it's not like a person makes a godly discovery. Once in their life, we discover God, we have a soul awakening, and the rest of the life is smooth sailing. It's like, whoa, we're on fire, we're serving God. Every day is a new challenge. Every day we wake up with ego. Every day we wake up with the sense that my life is mine, and my wealth and my everything I created. And every day we have to fight to bring back the faith, and it's back and forth and back. It's not just every day. It's you can be full of emunah 1 hour, and an hour later you're back in the struggle in the darkness. So how does it work? The answer is that even though this doesn't make any sense at all, God has given the klipa a power that makes no sense. That even though its entire existence is an existence of darkness, which means an absence of light, yet there is one beam of light that it can challenge. There's one beam of light that it can distort, that it can block, and that is the soul. Because since the klipa needs to create bechira chavshis, Hashem gave this power of concealment an ability to raise itself up, to rise against the soul, even though it's nothing, it's just darkness, and the soul is light, and darkness cannot exist with his light. Hashem decreed that the klipa could rise up against, that the Yetzer Hara and the unholy can rise up against the neshama and block its light, to create a challenge. Hashem gave it permission. Hashem gave the shadow the ability to fight the human being that's creating, that's the source of that shadow. Hashem gave it. It doesn't make any sense. How it can do that, permission was granted to it, to confuse the soul. Since the klipa is really built on nothingness, therefore the way it confuses the soul is it doesn't have to present you with anything of substance. It doesn't have to come with anything because the klipa itself doesn't have any substance. It's not made up of anything real. It's just a liar. It's just a deceiver. It's like a shadow that enters into the boxing ring, and it's like this 10-foot giant, and it's walking in, and it's nothing. It's non-existent. But what it does is it creates an illusion, and therefore all it has to do is to tell a lie, to say something, and that's the way it is. It just says things. It has chutzpah. You know when you tell a lie and you tell it with a straight face, and you don't flinch, and you say it with confidence? That confidence in people, what do you say? I've had so many times when you have people, or politicians, or people who lies through their teeth, but they're able to say it with looking straight into the camera and say it again and again, and you believe them. And that's what the klipa does. It lies and lies. It's a chronic liar. It lies and lies and lies and lies. It hacks us in China. It really hacks in the carpet, and it keeps on doing this again and again, and it creates this distortion. The other day I was in an IMAX film that shows a film on nature. It was so beautiful, so beautiful. It was all about how the miracle of the blue planet, how the world, that there's one in the midst of this vast, endless space. There is one planet where there's life. And there is, and it's shown how it's blue because it's the blue oceans, and on top of it is a thin layer of air. And this is the only inhabitable place known that they can know where life can thrive. And the miracle of it, and how, of course, the whole thing goes to how we're ruining it, and we're stopping, and we're causing the imbalance, and all of this, and we have to be very careful. It's all nice. But in the midst of the discussion, and this woman who's narrating it, she speaks with such confidence and such strength, and she speaks how a million years all this evolved. But then she talks about how all animals began to thrive in this, and from all these millions of animals, from all these millions of creatures, only one of them has arose with an intelligence and with an ability to be able to make tools and instruments, and begins farming and doing all these things. And I'm thinking to myself, you're speaking of such a spectacular thing, such an unbelievable entity, life on earth, and it just flows from your mouth just to say that out of nowhere one of them got up and decided to make tools. The cows didn't decide to do that. Anybody else didn't. But one of them out of nowhere just developed an intelligence, created tools, and made the world. It's so ridiculous, and everybody's sitting quietly, and everybody walks out, and it's all accepted. Why accepted? Because when you say something with confidence and with strength, and you deny the obvious, it's okay, people buy it. So here the Klippa denies truth, the animals, and it's able to make a ludicrous statement. It's able to deny to a person who's really made up of a soul the obvious that God is everywhere and everything, and the person could buy in, could get, at least temporarily, buy into that mishigas, buy into that lie. It's literally a temporary insanity. It would be this equivalent to something possessing a human being where the person loses the awareness of themselves, of who they are. They think they're someone else. It's a schizophrenic, or I don't know, whatever it would be. Where a person suddenly goes crazy and he doesn't know who he is anymore. Or someone suddenly gets alienated from his children or his parents and doesn't know that you're my, as a law. I mean, the obvious thing that you know that this is your brother, this is your child, this is your mother, suddenly you don't know it. Because something something possessed one's mind. That's what the Eibishter has given the power of the Klippa. And the purpose of why God gave the Klippa that power, to enable us to fight it. And if we fight it and we beat it, that's meaningful to him. And by being meaningful to him, he gives us great reward for doing that, for overcoming the Klippa. So it's a decree that doesn't have to make any sense, but so is a decree that Hashem has made. And sometimes the Klippa is able to have such arrogance and such lies, and it rises up with such chutzpah, with such audacity. See, usually Klippa, again, acknowledges God, but it tries to keep God at a distance. It doesn't want to, meaning even the Klippa, even within our Klippa consciousness, we all agree there is a God, created the world, but right now in my life, God is not important. That's what the Klippa does, usually. But there are times when we feed the Klippa so much that the Klippa gets the chutzpah to try a very nasty trick. And to even throw in a thought in a person's mind that God doesn't exist, and maybe everything is just a thought of complete denial of God. And guess what happens? The Klippa can get away with it. It can throw that in a person's mind and cloud a person's emunah. That doesn't mean that you don't believe in God. Doesn't mean. It means that there is a temporary blurry, and sometimes not temporary. Sometimes a person can live their life under this darkness, under this blur. It's only covering up on their emunah, on their intrinsic emunah that they have. And that's why the way to deal with something like that is not to argue or bring proof that there is a God created. If we ever find ourselves in a moment of darkness where we're questioning the very things that we know so deeply, if we ever find ourselves in those moments, don't go crazy. Don't think you're a heretic. You do one thing. You don't have to. You do one thing. And this is the advice he gives in Tanya. What you do is you get up, go to a closed room, lock the door, make sure no one is around, and start yelling at the Klippa inside of you. He doesn't, he says, don't yell with your mouth. Yell in your thought. Say, you chutzpan, how dare you? You lowlife. You despicable nothing what you are. How do you deny God who is everywhere, right over here, right now, looking at me this second? How dare you stand in front of him where he is everywhere and you say that he doesn't exist? It's like you have someone who is lying straight through the teeth. You don't argue. You get up and you shout, liar! And suddenly they're like, whoa! Someone called them who they are. And you deflate the ego. And suddenly the ego is broken and shattered. And then what? You have emunah. You always had emunah. The emunah is there completely. It's there. It's intact. It's whole. The Klippa is only creating a distortion through its arrogance, through its overblown ego, calling it what it really is, saying to it, giving it its true name, so then it weakens it. And that will explain this whole story with the Meraglim. The Jewish people are all believers. They saw the greatest miracles. They saw with their own eyes. But when a moment when God gives permission for the klipa to go at it on a person, then the klipa can get up and say the most craziest things to a people who saw it with their own eyes, and for that moment can create that distortion, that darkness. And look what happened, they fell for it. Again, we said before, there was no logic to their argument at all, to what these people have seen, and what they have gone through. They stood by Har Sinai, and they saw God's truth emanating from the earth, from the sky, from all four directions. They had a direct encounter with God. You're going to tell me that someone can tell them that there is a giant over there and God can't take care of them? There was no logic to the argument at all. It was just simply lies. And the klipa has the ability, that God gave it permission to challenge the human being. What did Moshe Rabbeinu do in that situation? He didn't philosophize. He didn't have to show them any signs. What did God tell them to do? God told them it's time to break their egos. They're overly comfortable with themselves. They have a sense of self-importance. And that's what's inflating their ego. That's inflating the klipa. You know when we're not in touch with our soul? When we're arrogant. When we're so, we feel the self-importance. I'm so great. And the self-importance doesn't always come. It can be success from business. It can be success in other things. It can be even from success in Judaism, success in learning, success, and you feel like, I'm such a great man, I did so much, I feel so proud of myself, I feel so accomplished. That's the opposite of the soul. The soul feels Hashem's emes, Hashem is important, Hashem is real. I'm important because I'm a humble servant of God, that's it, nothing else. So when the klipa rises with its arrogance, that's blocking. And that's what's causing all this mishagas. So what does Hashem say to Moshe Rabbeinu? Now it's time to do a little banging of the ego. So Moshe gets up and he lets them hear it. That's why he speaks. You wonder, like, come on, be a little gentle. He'll say you'll die in the midbar. He says, no, your corpses will fall. You'll fall. And he's yelling at them and giving them over the word of it and breaking that feeling of, we are. What are we are? A bunch of corpses going to die in the desert. And when he said it to them, he shattered that haughtiness, that self-pride. And when he did that, suddenly the klipa was gone in a poof. And the Jewish people on their own, believers, absolute believers. The next morning, without any sign, without anything, they're there, they're ready to go, they're ready to follow everything Hashem says because a soul believes. Yidden believe. It was a moment of some outer concealment and covering. And what needed to be done is a deflation of their ego. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu did. And poof, they were out. They were gone. A person never should get horrified if you have doubts in faith. Because they're not real. They're not real. It's not of anything of any substance. What you need to do in cases like that is one needs a little, the ego needs a little clapping, that he doesn't have the chutzpah anymore to block and to distort and to cover up on the emunah of the neshama. There's a story of the holy Remendel of Riminiv. This story takes this concept and puts it into a little bit of a different setting, but it's the same idea. Remendel of Riminiv once was told a shochet, a ritual slaughterer in his community, that he should be very careful. Be very careful. Because the extraneous forces, the chitzonim, are after him. Because you have to be a tzaddik to know that. They made him their target. It means they want to get his soul. God should protect anybody with time from being a target of these, for whatever reason, gets their interest. That they're looking to get someone. So they're after you. They're after this person. They're after you. So he said, be careful. So he didn't heed him. He didn't listen. And he warned him 3 times. He says, I'm telling you, that you got to be careful. And he just dismissed it. So one day he was invited to perform a bris milah, circumcision. So he was told, and they said they're going to pick him up and they're going to take him to a town, and over there he's going to do the bris. So he got into the wagon and they started going, and suddenly he sees they're going. It doesn't look like they're going to any town. They're just traveling through the forest, and they're traveling. He's getting all worried. He's getting all scared, but the coachman says, don't worry, we're going, we need to go, it's over there. Before he knows it, he ends up in front of this big, huge house in the middle of nowhere. And he got a very, very, very uneasy feeling when he started walking into the home. He felt like there was something very dark in this place, something very... But as he walks in, he sees people, they look like Jews, they have beards and payas and everything, and they invite him in, but there's something about them that he just doesn't like. And he realizes now that could be, this has something to do with what he was warned by. He says he wants to see the baby, so they bring him into the room. The mother of the child says to him, you know, I need to talk to you quietly. So somehow she closes the door, she talks to him, she says, oh, are you in trouble? She says, you fell into the hands of the worst of the worst. She says, no one comes out of it. I doubt you'll ever come out of here alive. These are demons. They're very, very, very dangerous entities. They've gotten me here years ago. I'm stuck over there. The head of them married me, and this is the baby. This is horrible. He says, the only thing I'll tell you that maybe you'll be lucky to get out of here alive is if you do not eat and partake of anything they give you to eat, any drink or food, anything. If you refrain from taking even one bit of what they're going to offer you, maybe you'll make it out. Because if you have any benefit from them, forget it. Okay, so comes that night. There was a big party, and wagons came, and people came, and they were big and a delicious food, and he was hungry, didn't eat all day, but he held himself back, and they kept on offering him something to eat, and he was saying, no, I'm not eating now. I'm not feeling well. I'm nauseous. This, that. He made it through that evening, and he didn't eat. The next morning was the bris, and then after that again, the food was spectacular, and he was so hungry, and they were nagging him like crazy. Everybody came and begged him, and he wasn't going to touch anything. It was very hard for him. He almost felt faint. But then afterwards he said, okay, did the bris was over, and he said, time to go back. They took him back. They took him back to the city of Rimenov, and he was so shooken up that he wanted to go back to Remendel of Rimenov and go in to ask for a bracha, and to help him, to heal him from this situation, from the trauma. Remendel of Rimenov, when he came to the door, Remendel told the shamus to tell him, get out of here, you impure person, get out of here. So he comes, and that's what happened. He chases him away. He's begging, he's pleading, he's crying, and the Rebbe doesn't want to look at him. Get away from me, I don't want to see you. After much begging, he allowed him to come. He came back and he says, I told you 3 times, be careful where you go. Be careful. You didn't listen. He says, you know what? They're after you still. And they're going to get you. He says, but there's one thing that you can do. They're going to come back and invite you another time for something. You're going to have to go back there. But this time I'll tell you what to do. So his advice to him was as follows, that when he goes back over there, his job is going to be to walk in there and to look them in the eye and say to them, you are nothing, you don't exist. You are nothing, you don't exist. You are nothing, you don't exist. And that's what happened a little while later, and he said, I'm going to help you out. A little while later, something else, he got an invitation. And he knew that they're going to get him, so he has to go. He was very afraid, but he had confidence in what his Rebbe told him. So again, he traveled with them back into the forest, came to the place, and as he walked in, he started immediately looking at every single one of them and telling him, you're a nobody, you're a nobody. And they were getting furious and angry. And they went to their leader and they said, this guy is saying we're a nobody. So they said, oh, let him bring him over here, let him dare say it in front of me. So he came into the room and they were all surrounding, and he looks at them and he starts screaming, you're a nobody. And the guy screams, you say you were a nobody? And he winks to all of them, and they start spewing fire at him. And he was terrified. And then they started doing such frightening things. And he doesn't flinch. He's terrified and scared, but he's screaming, you're a nobody, you're nothing, you're nothing, you're nothing, till the guy got so mad. And he sees they're becoming less and less. And then he says to him, how dare you defy me? He says, it's not me, I am coming with the power of my teacher and master, the holy Remendel of Rimenov. So this guy says, so the head says, you know what? He says, he calls his attendant. He says, go to the other room, bring me the book of all the rabbis. And I want to see if I find this rabbi there. If I find that rabbi in my book, means that this rabbi has no power over me. But if he's not there, then I might be in trouble. Because he says all these other rabbis who are not purely serving God with absolute purity, and they might have some thoughts that are not ulterior motives in their service, end up in my book. He says, but if they're pure, they're not here. So he brought him the book, and he went through all the Rebbes and whatever, and Mendel of Rimenev wasn't there. So he had to concede to him. And he says, you win. He let him out, they dropped him back off, and he went back home. But the idea is, and I read the story a long time ago, and when I was thinking about this lesson, it came to me, but that's really what the klipa is. It doesn't have any existence. It's not real. And it's only there to test the human being. A person gets up to it and looks it in the eye and says that you are nothing. You have no power. You're absolutely just a fraud, a fake, a liar, and a meaningless thing. Then it crumbles. Then it disappears, and it really doesn't have any power on any of us. May Hashem remove all the klipa, all the darkness, and all the blockages from our souls. Our eyes should open up. We should see the emes. We should see the truth. We should see how the world is filled with godly light, that Hashem is accompanying us all the time. Miracles are happening to us all the time, and may we merit the time when the spirit of impurity will remove from the earth, and Hashem's light will shine brightly in this world with its full light with the coming of Mashiach. May it be now.